Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Normalize Money Show. The night class, of course, is the Normalize Money Project. My name is Kirsten Vanderjack. I have Julie on. Julie, how are you today?
Very good. Thank you. Can't wait to talk about how much something costs.
Yeah, money is always the topic here. And today we're talking about how much does it cost to raise a child in 2023. So, Julie, if you had to guess on an annual basis, how much does it cost for one child for a year?
Well, it's currently 2023. And as you know, with all the cost of the food and cost of a lot of things that have gone up in the last year, my guess is probably at least $20,000 to $25,000. My guess would be.
Yeah, I
That would-
think that is more in line with what some of this, data shows. This here, what we're showing on our screen, they're estimating right now. This is in Illinois. The cost is between $15,500 to $17,500 per year. I would be with you more around $20,000 per year, maybe even $25,000 per year. And they're saying that this is a middle class family with two kids spend about, let's call it 14,000 every year for each child. So that's a middle class family. Maybe they're not doing sports or participating in field trips. I'm not sure. People have different definitions for, lower middle class, upper middle class, etc. One thing I think is interesting here is the inflation rate. And so this article actually shows inflation rate of 25.6% just from 2015 to 2023.
And that to me, this article seems more realistic to me with that number, because I think a lot of times the media is pushing out stuff to try to kind of curb those numbers down so people don't get, sticker shock or like realistic about what's really going on sometimes in the world. But yeah, that this seems more realistic, because I know that, obviously you talked about participating in sports. You talk about some of that extra money that you might give up as a mother or a father to let your kid play in a sport. And some of those sports are super expensive. Not only is the equipment expensive, but all of the traveling and the games and everything. So I think that just buying food, clothes, cost of books, or materials for school, and just some of the basics of that kids want. I think that 25% is probably about what I would feel in actuality of my pocketbook of how much more I've had to shell out.
Yeah, I mean, definitely giving out those things, but then also talking about, in just the price of goods going up, right? That part of it, and inflation every year and how it's going up. They are in this article saying that for a child born in 2015, it'll cost $233,000 to raise them through the age of 17. The reason that this particular topic is really important to this class for primarily teenagers or adults in recovery, or even adults who, maybe have never taken a personal finance class, is because we talk about shaping your life and that you are in control of your life to some degree, and especially financially. It's the decisions that you make that will determine your wealth when you're 80 years old. And so our last class was, about being 80 and looking at your life in hindsight. And now this class is talking about, if you're going to spend, let's call it $250,000 per child, what's your decision? And so I know some people will say, well, we don't have enough children as it relates to, do you know what I'm talking about? There's a whole conversation around people are not having enough children anymore for our species. And that's not what this conversation is supposed to be about. This is about the money and the really difficult conversation of course, if you do love children and you want your children to have children, that's great. But I
Well,
think we have to
don't forget.
consider like the money part of it too, because I don't think that that's talked about. I wish when I was 20, somebody would have had this 15-minute conversation with me and said, hey, listen, I'm not trying to scare you, but seriously, it's going to cost you a ton of money to have one child.
Well, and don't forget that I think back in the 30s and earlier than that, this topic wasn't even considered because you actually needed more hands on the farm or you needed more labor around to help you out. And that was where I think as we progressed into more of the industrial age and more women started to go to work, that it was, a choice that you had to make to have a career and to have kids, and it's been kind of like an internal fight between society and I think people personally on what they want to try to take on and handle. And so sometimes when you start throwing that whole money situation in there about, like, well, you could call it selfishness too, but what about me? Like when you do have kids, there are things that you have to do, which include, budgeting or knowing that you can't overspend. And I think that's the part where, like the young kids that are in school right now and are still supported by their parents sometimes realize that it's costing their parents a lot of money to, pay for the gas in the car or to get them, and some people, obviously some of the kids that we're talking to, maybe their parents didn't have like you didn't have a lot of stuff to begin with, let alone a car to use or a way to get to work to make more money to buy the stuff that you wanted. And that's where, like you said, I think having this conversation with the younger society is something that they need to put in the back of their head, that when they want to have a family, that they put into perspective about the money situation and what they want to spend their time doing, spending their time working to make more money to pay for things, or do they want to spend more quality time and have less kids?
And that's part of it too, is the time aspect of it, because the more kids that you have and the more money that you do need to make, it's not a want, it's just an absolute necessity. It really, this is why your job is important, your strength finder is important, getting into a career where you can plan for these things, because otherwise, I think people do end up in their 30s if they have one, two, three, four children and they're working their whole lives and now they're paying for childcare and somebody else is raising their child, or they're saying, it doesn't make sense for me to go to work and pay someone else to raise my child. So I'm going to leave my job. I'm going to stay at home. I'm going to raise my own children and we're going to financially be strapped. And so this is the time and money discussion around, yes, what does your life really look like? Is it being a stay-at-home mom or dad with this many children? Who's going to help you nanny the children when you have to get around? Because a lot of people don't live near their family anymore. They live in different states and things. And then one other layer to all of this, in my opinion, that we should talk about is when your parents get older and they maybe don't have the funds to take care of themselves in their elderly age, because just everything in life is quite expensive unless they've had a really phenomenal job like a lawyer or a doctor or something, owned a business for 20 or 30 or 40 years that was successful, right? Because I feel like now, me personally, I'm 40, I have 4 children. My parents passed away, but if my parents were still alive, they would be, somewhere around 60, and I would be taking care of them because, I think financially they didn't manage their money they didn't know how to. Do you know what I'm saying? Because now you end up taking care of your children and your parents.
Well, and I mean, obviously in some cultures that's very accepted and that is the norm. And then there's other, cultures that kind of say, we want our we want our, our own lives, I guess. Even as you get older, you don't necessarily want to become a quote burden, but when you're a child and you're being raised, you don't feel like you're a burden. But in actuality, the burden is all about the money, right? I mean, and the time. And that's where I think you get a lot of reward from the time that you spend with your kids and the time that you make memories, and you don't really see the financial burden that you're putting on yourself, but that's stress, right? And then when your parents get older and your parents are requiring more of your time and requiring maybe more of your money, and if you know how to navigate the system and use your parents as, either wealth or non-wealth to see what you can do to try to help get outside sources to take care of them, that's still, puts something back on your family and the family that you're raising and how you're running your household.
Yeah, I want to spend just another few minutes talking about this. I know that we're over our 10-minute mark. And if you're listening right now, I hope that you'll stay with us, because this particular conversation is so important. Talking about 3 generations, where people don't like to talk about money or life insurance or what the plan is for when they get older. Maybe that's the case in your family. And yet, you still need to be able to think about those things, because you want to take care of people who you love. And they also need to take care of themselves financially. So that way they're not 70 years old and unable to take care of themselves. And I like what you said about, you know, in some cultures, it's just typical for 3 generations to live together and to take care of each other. And that circles us back around to shared housing, but within a family, right, where you have 3 generations. And there's a lot of, I think, support that's built into that, because the children get to hang out with the grandparents and the grandparents with the children. And the parents in the middle maybe get a little bit of relief. So to me, there's quite a few people that are important to me who did not plan for their retirement. And then there are some people who have, and they're able to travel.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think we both have that case, and if we think about the people that really didn't plan and they're living paycheck to paycheck, and they probably lived paycheck to paycheck their whole lives, that, their ability to, kind of think beyond the age of 70 just didn't exist, especially when they were 20, because they had so many other things that they were wrapped up in their life. And, we as shared housing providers, offer that time in people's lives when they don't have enough money for their own apartment, they don't have enough money for um their own house. They don't have, that stability maybe of family supporting them because they have a drug problem or they have an alcohol problem or they have, mental health issues, or they just choose not to, or like you, maybe they just don't have anybody. They have nobody else. They can't go to someone else's house because they're not alive. And that, we as, providers of housing have to realize too that, these people can pull themselves out and can think about these things. So I know we're talking about raising kids and we're talking about, how much it costs. But even if you're in that situation and you're like, I couldn't have a kid because I can't even pay for my own stuff, and that's something where we go, as law enforcement and social workers and stuff, we go back to just the age old, hey, you got to put yourself first, you got to take care of yourself and think about what's going on in your life right now. And that's something that, we can only encourage people to think about, especially as part of this class.
and I think that that should be the normal, what you just said. Take care of yourself first. It's not being selfish. In fact, it's the opposite, where you're saying, financially, I've got to make sure that I'm good in mind, spirit, money, and everything else before I can have a child. And so maybe you look at, right, the things that you need to do and plan before you have some a child or even an animal. So it would be, right, get a good education, something that makes you happy. It doesn't necessarily have to be college, but it needs to be something that can provide a decent wage. Of course, you need to have a house or a shared house, and you need to save money during this time. So that way, paying even just to deliver a child is several $1,000s that you have to pay out of pocket these days right now at the hospital. So think of that, right? Even though you have insurance, which you pay for every month, you're going to need to cough up, let's just call it $10,000 if you have to have a cesarean and deliver those babies. And so these are the expenses that need to be considered. And also looking long term, what does your life look like during these 10-year chapters that I like to talk about, ages 20 to 30, 30 to 40, etc. So we will wrap the class right now. Julie, I don't have anything else. Do you have anything else?
No, I just encourage people if they like what they're hearing, and we have other shows as well at Katie's House Foundation. Like and subscribe, make comments. We'd love to interact with our listeners, and we thanks anyone for their support, and have a great week.
Have a great week. We will talk to you guys next weekend. Bye-bye.